Welcome to the Wounds of the Faithful podcast, brought to you by DSW Ministries. Your host is singer, songwriter, speaker, and domestic violence advocate Diana Winkler. She is passionate about helping survivors in the church heal from domestic violence and abuse and trauma. This podcast is not a substitute for professional counseling or qualified medical help. Now, here is Diana.
Welcome back to part 2 of my 1-year anniversary celebration. I hope that you enjoyed last week's festivities. We are going to start out the episode with another new song that I recorded for my new album. It's called I Know the Plans. It's a song based on Jeremiah 29:11. Enjoy. If his eyes are on the speck said I have to prosper you. I hope that you enjoyed that song. That verse is definitely one of my favorite verses and the verse for my ministry. Now, I found out from the last episode that I have to either talk faster or talk less to get everybody in a reasonable time frame. So I'm going to try. So let's dive into this week's guest highlights. Episode number 7, we have Ken Keis. Ken Keis talks about how to live our lives on purpose instead of letting life happen to us. He shares his journey of growing up on a dairy farm and realizes that this was not the life he wanted for himself. He talks about his family originating from Hungary and the history of abuse that his parents endured. His inspiring story continues as he overcomes a learning disability of dyslexia and finally fulfills his dream of becoming an international author. He gives us very practical and tangible steps to get out of the hole that we find ourselves in and gain the courage to achieve our dreams. At the end of the show, Ken gives away a free copy of his book, The Quest for Purpose. So you'll definitely want to listen to this episode and take advantage of this free offer. His other books on his website, kenkeis.com, is, let's see, Why Aren't You More Like Me? Discovering the Secrets to Understanding Yourself and Others. To Deliberate Leadership, Creating Success Through Personal Style. So be sure to check that out and listen to what Ken has to say.
Give it up. Offense is a choice. So, we talked about trauma and we talked about forgiveness, but being offended is also a choice. Dr. David Burns' work around trauma, if you've ever read his book, Feel Good, it's got about 500 pages at 4-point font, is that my response is always a choice.
Yes.
And even Dr. Gottman in his work around relationships is that once I get over 100 beats per minute, non-athletic, I'm no longer rational. Well, that's where we have trauma, we have abuse, we have crazy things that happen. One of our number one constituents we serve is law enforcement. So Dr. Anderson, who founded the company, was a criminology professor. And then one of my co-authors, Dr. Mitch DeViti, teaches law enforcement officers emotional intelligence. What's the most dangerous situation for law enforcement to go into? Domestic dispute.
Yes.
Why? Because people are irrational.
Mm-hmm.
So I've let myself get ramped up. I'm now, biologically, I'm no longer in control of my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And now I will say and do things that will regret. And now I'm completely out of control. I mean, there was this situation that happened in Palm Springs a couple of 2-3 years ago where there was an abusive situation carrying on. The officers broke up. The couple started to contain him, and then she got a gun out and killed both officers.
Oh.
So that's why officers in these environments, they said, you have to watch your back because it's completely unpredictable as part of it.
Give like a list of actionable things that they can do right now.
Now, just before I do it, so that we don't miss you, I have a gift for everybody.
Yes.
And so I'm going to give you access to the e-copy. Sorry, that's kind of just reflecting of my The Quest for Purpose book. And to get that is go to my speaker site, which is Keis, KenKeis.com/faithful. I don't know where we got that name from, and you'll, in that hidden URL, and of course you'll be able to put it in the show notes, Diana, as well, is that you'll be able to go there and then download the e-version of the book. What I am sometimes shocked at is that I give away this book is that the amount of people who don't opt in to get the book. It is a roadmap, a step-by-step process to get clear about who and what and where and what you should be doing in your life and all components. And now it's going to take work. It's going to take time, but where are you going to be in 6 months if you don't do it? So it's there. I spent 6 months going through this process with my coach, Mike McManus, driving 3 hours each way when it wasn't pertinent. So when I think about actionable steps, and you think about people's lives, first of all, if you don't have a purpose in life, then your purpose is to find your purpose. And so that becomes the focus rather than trying to say, I better be doing this, or just take a breath and allow yourself time and space. I've noticed that the Holy Spirit is never frantic. He's on time and he's moving forward, but he's never frantic. And so chaos is not from him. So just be peaceful, be quiet, and start paying attention and asking yourself this question. If you're doing what you're doing right now, in all contexts of your life, 20 years from now, is that okay? And if you say no, then that obviously infers change. So what is it that you're going to move towards? Don't freak out. Don't try to do it all. If I'm trying to be a marathon runner, this morning, and then I said I'm going to run and do a marathon tonight, I'm going to be dead. I got to train for it.
Yep.
So life is the same. The other one, Diana, is get a group that's going to support you. Like, look around and don't judge the 5 closest friends, but say, are the 5 closest friends in a space that are going to help you to go where you need to go? And then the other thing is that life takes effort. If you finish watching the show and do nothing and do no action steps, then you're going to have the same thing tomorrow. So what are the steps that you can take? Start moving towards it. Download the book. It's got a complete roadmap. And the other thing, we'll make sure that my contact information is there, Diana, is that if people have questions, reach out. I'll respond as best as I can in the time that's allotted there. But I'll respond to you to be able to say, hey, how can we help you? Or call you and your ministry and some of the coaching that is available there. So that'll get you started. And again, don't try to do it all overnight. Just take one step at a time. The research shows is that if you try to 3 things at once to change it, you have about a 15% likelihood of implementing it, and a 75% success rate if it's just one thing. So one thing at a time, progress forward, and keep listening to Diana's podcast shows. And that should be the other step that they do too.
Our next guest, Doug Setter, was on episode number 6. And his book is called One Less Victim. His book is above me here on the shelf. Doug Setter gives us some advice on how not to be a victim in today's world. He starts sharing about his background in the military, his martial arts training, and the inspiration for his book, One Less Victim. He weaves stories of abuse and PTSD that are all too common in the military, with his own tale of escaping the clutches of a pedophile. He ends with giving us practical safety tips that listeners can incorporate into their lives right now. So if you're from a military background or martial arts background, you will especially enjoy the stories. I had the idea to record this episode in my martial arts room, which was very echoey, didn't have very good acoustics, so it also didn't have very good lighting. So I'm sorry about the sound quality and or the lighting, but it was definitely worth to hear what Doug had to say on our interview. So listen up here.
Self-trust. That's the big thing. It's self-trust. Because I know as a kid, at one time, geez, I have flashbacks now. I remember going to the bus station, and some guy offered me a ride, and my head, I said, this doesn't happen. Why would, but I said, I was tired. And sure enough, out in the car, we're going over, there's a bridge, and then he started coming on to me, grabbed my leg and whatnot, and I said, well, no, pull over here, and I bailed out right away. But I was 15, and, the last thing you want to do is tell my mother that, I basically a homosexual assault. You already have your self-doubts as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really, I didn't say anything. I mentioned some friends, and they kind of laughed it off. But right away, there's well, what were you doing taking rides from strangers? Blah, blah, there's all these things that you're scared and ashamed of.
Well, they blame you for what the perpetrator did.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And there is that feeling. You often, I've talked to people, in the bar fight, and well, what did I do wrong? This. Well, no. The predator was there already. Mm-hmm. They woke up that morning, decide they're going to try to hurt someone. So you have to, don't go running around with high heels flashing. I mean, you're a target. You can't run fast with high heels, right?
Mm-mm.
I couldn't. So I don't know how they do it. Girls do it, but that's have a way out. If I'm going to go to a party, and we've all been to teenage parties, and you and I know there's always some jerk that shows up to cause trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Go sleep in your friend's car or your car. Lock the door if you had too much to drink. Go. No, don't go in any strange rooms. Have an exit plan.
Very smart.
In, out. You get it. Oh, how are you getting home today? Oh, I don't know. No, I've got the extra $20 in my wallet, my back pocket. I get the cab. I'm out of there.
And the big one, learn to say no.
Thank you. Yeah.
Learn how to say no.
Say no and practice it, and then you're gonna disappoint people. So what?
Yep. And say it really loud.
Yeah. No, I don't want it. Hey, not today.
So Doug is also a fitness expert, and you can find him on secondwindbodyscience.com. He's got lots of other books on here for sale about personal fitness training, nutrition, books like Fit Femme After 50. So check it out. Okay, we've got our next guest on episode 30 and 31, Latrell Wilson. So a 2-part series. How do you break the generational cycle of abuse? So growing up in Oakland, California, she was raised in a Christian home as a preacher's kid. Latrell was not sheltered from the realities of life. She talks openly and honestly about how she got involved with many abusive men, including the father of her autistic son. We remember how "Just Say No to Drugs" on the 80s slogan affected our lives, and discuss how we can talk to our kids about sex, drugs, and making good choices. Come and hear her story about her high-risk pregnancy, how her son stopped breathing several times, and the miracle of his life. Have you ever been stalked by a former boyfriend? Well, it was Latrell's living nightmare. She describes her history of relationships with abusive men and the process it took to finally leave. She shares the joys and challenges of raising her genius autistic son and also caring for her mother. When she was in college, she was diagnosed with dyslexia, but she never let it stop from reaching her goals. After years of being done with God and church, she comes back into the Father's loving arms. So join us again as we listen to Lattre's incredible journey towards healing and peace.
So by the time he got tested, which was at 5 years old, around 5 years old, they could not find him on the spectrum. They just knew he was on the spectrum. And we're in the doctor's office at the testing site, and another team of doctors come to me and ask me, well, what did you do? Because we don't see him, we can't find him on the spectrum. And I was like, well, is this a good thing? Because the autism world is new to me. So you have to tell me, is this a good thing? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh.
He's got his own spectrum.
Basically, he has his own spectrum. Like, he can hold a conversation with you at 5 years old. Like, you talk to him, he will talk right back to you. He could read right. He could do all the things that they said a kid with autism could not do.
So is he like a savant?
Basically.
Wow.
Basically. I call him right now, he's my baby genius. I call him my baby genius. You have to, you will have to be in a room with him to understand why I call him that. Like because you don't see autism. I don't see autism, and others don't see autism. They're like, something is off. They don't know what it is, and I have to say, oh, he has autism. They're like, what?
Yeah, I've had some friends with autistic children, so I've had some exposure. Have you ever seen The Good Doctor?
Yeah, I love that show.
I really like the show, so it's very interesting.
I don't agree with how they have him talking because he sounds like a robot.
Yeah, we've mentioned that too.
And my son said, when I introduced the show to my son, he was like, I do not sound like that.
No, but he's probably just as smart as the doctor, so
yes,
it's just a TV show.
It's just a TV show, but I can identify with some of the quirkiness and some of the serious things of having autism and how difficult it can be for them to live in this world. And so I'm very passionate about autism, and especially the parent. I was young when I found out my son had autism, and autism wasn't something that was broadcast like it is broadcast now. Like it's everywhere. Everybody got a kid with autism. You got a kid with autism. You got a kid with autism.
Yeah. In the 80s, if you had autism, you were just the weird kid in the neighborhood. There was no.
Exactly. And so now that it is definitely out there, there are resources that I didn't have that I'm so jealous of these parents. I'm like, wait. You did what? How did that happen?
Come on. We don't want to be jealous. We want to be happy for them, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely happy. It's just like, wait a minute. I didn't have that. It was just resources. Like, they have so many resources for parents now. I didn't have resources. It was a secret club. It was a secret club that you just happen to join, and parents are so afraid to say anything. We don't have parents to talk to. And so our normal kids, like my son like to say, the regular kids, parents, They don't understand what ASD parents, are going through. And so our parenting is definitely different. And so the conversation is different when we talk to each other. It's the empathy that we feel for one another. And we feel it because no one really understands what we go through, and no one really understands the type of parenting we have to do in order for our kid to not have a meltdown, or our kid not to, to succeed. I would say that, but just the littlest thing can just throw their whole little thing off. And it's taking you 3 or 4 hours just to recover for because I cut the sandwich wrong.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I cut the sandwich wrong. Now I got to recover from a meltdown, a 5-hour meltdown.
So that's like, when the good doctor, his roommate rearranges the canned goods in the wrong way. It just,
Definitely.
There's the same thing. He puts the toilet paper on the wrong way. It's just toilet paper, people. But
not to them.
Not to them. Her book is called My Last 20, and you can find her website at destinedtobeblessed.com. Also get her book on any bookseller online. I will have all this in the show notes for you. Episode 48. Our guest is Rob Decker. Sometimes in our lives, circumstances seem so hopeless that ending it all seems to be the only solution to our pain. And that happened to Rob Decker when he decided to end it all by jumping out of a 3rd-story window and surviving the fall. We will find out about his childhood abuse, being raised by parents who were addicts, his path of self-destruction, and making bad choices in relationships. You will hear about the series of events that led up to his wake-up call to bring him to Jesus and his endless grace. Today, God uses Rob to help others overcome hopelessness, addiction, suicide with his numerous ministries. You can find out more about Rob Decker and his story called Falling Into You on his website, robdeckerspeaks.com. And here is a little bit of our conversation we had.
And it was our biggest, the thing that we thought about was my drinking. So for the very first 9 months of our relationship, it was all about my drinking. And I eventually got behind the wheel of her car, intoxicated, crashed her car. And yeah, I ran from the scene of the crime, fell into a creek, got bloody, got wet, hid under a house. And here I am under a house, man, God, look at where I'm at right now. I was the guy that jumped out of a window, tried to take his life, was told he was never going to walk again. I'm working out all the time. I have a job. I have this wonderful young lady in my life. I have a pretty great life. And here I am throwing it away for the alcohol. Because I'm I've chosen to drink alcohol instead of hand the rest of my problems to you. And in that moment, I told God that if he bailed me out of that situation, and he didn't have to, because he doesn't need to negotiate with me. But if he bailed me out of that situation, I would marry Alyssa and I would never drink ever again. And so that happened almost 10 years ago. I've never picked up the bottle again. And what I truly believe happened under that house needed to happen, like jumping out of the window needed to happen. I believe I truly repented. I think I understood the magnitude of God's grace and his love for me in my life. And I just knew I didn't need the alcohol, that he was good enough for me. And so, you know, unfortunately, when you hear the word repentance, it's been, you know, pretty tarnished through religion. But really what repentance is just having that, you know, that moment of, you know, this is wrong and I can't do it anymore.
It's
you know,
about face.
Yeah, 100%. It's nothing so crazy. It's just something has to change, you know, and having the right heart before that. So, you know, that happened. And so, you know, the moment I quit drinking, more healing took place. You know, God now was allowed in, because I wasn't blocking him out with the alcohol, to really work on the deeper childhood stuff that I had and all the other trauma. And my, you know, at the time that I was drinking, I was struggling because I had just hurt myself. I was told I wasn't going to get to go to the gym. I was doing really well at a job and I was crushing it, but I was so performance driven. You know, it was like the, you know, with alcoholics or addicts, it's like more is better. Really what it is I had to prove to my dad constantly how valuable I was by performing at such a high level. And I mean, even though the reality of that situation was that would never happen, that was how I approached my life. And so I was getting so deep into performing at my new job that it provided like a whole nother level of stress for me. And now God had an opportunity to work on that for me. Like, okay, well, this isn't about your worldly father and you needing to perform, right? But it was like lesson after lesson, healing trauma after trauma, and giving me wisdom on top of wisdom. And so I've spent the last 15 years really weeding through the previous 30, right? And trying to unpack all that and heal all that. So, you know, yeah, I mean, we can fast forward to what I do now. You know, I'm a health and fitness coach, and I'm an addiction recovery coach as well. I work with at-risk youth. I run a gym out of my house, and, you know, I'm a family man now, and, you know, I have a ministry as well. So I basically try to wear the hat of everything that I ever needed.
Well, I tell you, listening to your story, I mean, I think we've all gone through God taking us to the woodshed more than once to get a hold of us, because we're so hard-headed and stubborn as a mule. Oh, you didn't learn the lesson the first time? Well, we're going to go back to the woodshed and we're going to learn another lesson today. But there is grace and forgiveness from the Lord. And he's the God of second chances. Amen.
Yeah, redemption is my middle name.
Yes.
He has redeemed my life like no one's business, and he continues to bless it. And, you know, I truly understand his grace. I mean, he's got so much of it. Not that I ever want to abuse it, because you know, there were times in my walk where I did abuse his grace, but, you know, he even bestowed grace on me then too. And I'm just so grateful for everything that he's pulled me out of. And now I have a chance to give that back to the people and share my story and show people, you know, what fixes all that stuff, you know, what transforms, what truly transforms people and transforms lives.
Okay, episode 43 is Maegan Cocoran on how can an abuse advocate not recognize the red flags of abuse in her own relationships. Well, that's what happened to Maegan. She is from the Secret Garden podcast. She shares her experiences in the emergency room of comforting sexual assault victims and ensuring that the collection of evidence is completed accurately. Find out what the connection is with the show Law and Order. Maegan reveals what is the process during a rape kit and what happens to the kit afterwards. and how we can advocate for ourselves and our loved ones during this traumatic time. We also discussed what are the characteristics of a narcissist and how a narcissist does not think like everyone else. And we end with Maegan's own harrowing story of her ex-husband and dating tips for breaking free of the grip that the narcissist has over us. It was great to connect with Maegan, a fellow advocate, and you can find out more about her on the Divine Self website. And she has a YouTube channel, and her podcast is called The Secret Garden, available on all podcast channels. So listen to what Maegan has to say here. You're our resident narcissist expert this time, so.
I am. I don't know if it's so funny. I actually just did a podcast a couple of days ago with somebody else and was like, oh, a narcissist expert. And I was like, I don't know if that's a good thing.
It's kind of how you look at it, right?
Yeah, I was like, well, you got to go through the PhD training, which meaning, in a relationship with a narcissist to get that become an expert, I guess. So, yeah, I'm happy to guide people and get them through it. But yeah, it's a brutal journey to get here.
Yeah, we were both abused by narcissists. And so tell the listeners who aren't familiar with what exactly narcissism is.
Sure. So I think one of the most unfortunate things in society today is that we say, oh, he's such a narcissist. And that's not what we're talking about. Narcissists are people with personality disorders. And there's actually 4 different types of personality disorders. There's borderline personality disorder, narcissism, sociopath, and psychopath. And they all are on a spectrum. And pretty much the same trait that all of them have is they lack empathy. They don't have the empathy gene. And when you come into the wake of a narcissist, it's pretty brutal. They spin you into a web and abuse you. And really what they do is, we call it extracting narcissistic supply. So it's really like their drug of choice is abusing you, and they actually have a chemical reaction to that abuse that makes them feel in control and feel powerful. And their goal is to always extract that from you. So yeah, and it's really just because they lack empathy. So they're willing to do anything to get that narcissistic supply.
Well, in my experience, they're good at faking empathy in front of other people.
Yes.
Putting on a show for the right people.
They're very good. They're very good chameleons. They can put on any show anywhere for anybody that's watching and convince everybody else of a totally different story than what's going on behind closed doors in your home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely part of my story and my experience. Now, you're relatively new to being a survivor of an abusive relationship, and you're still dealing with that. Can you share a little bit about your story?
Sure. So I actually started out as I'm a certified crisis intervention counselor, and I got that in 2008 in New York City. And I'm affiliated with Mount Sinai Hospitals, which used to be St. Luke's and Roosevelt Hospital. And I did domestic and sexual violence advocacy. So I know a lot about abuse and advocating and trauma intervention. And then I fell victim myself to domestic violence. But before it ever became physical, it was very mentally and emotionally abusive. And I didn't understand what was going on. Even though I'm certified in this, I didn't understand that I was being abused. And it took me going to therapy one day, even like I said, before it became physical, for the therapist to look at me and say, hey, you're a domestic violence survivor or victim. And she's like, this is a domestic violence relationship. And I was like, no, I'm not in the hospital. He didn't hit me. And she's like, no, this is an abusive relationship. And and that rattled me to the core. And then I came across a book called Dodging Energy Vampires by Dr. Christian Northrup. And I listened to it on Audible, and I literally pulled my car over to the side of the road and cried for an hour and was like, this is it. She knows what a narcissist is. And so she calls an energy vampire a narcissist. And I felt so validated because I thought I was going crazy, to be honest with you. He had me convinced so much that the problem was me and that I needed to fix everything. But the bar kept going higher and higher and higher and higher, and I couldn't fix it. And I was exhausted, and I felt like there was something wrong with me, and I was broken. And I just felt totally validated when I heard that, he was possibly a narcissist. And then I dove down the rabbit hole of narcissism and obsessively watched YouTube videos, and that saved my life and helped me kind of understand what was going on and find the courage to eventually one day leave. And I left in February of 2019.
Our next fabulous guest is the Reverend Dr. Marcia Ledford. On episode 37, we had a great conversation talking about how can we be more like Jesus in this world of pain, suffering, and evil. Is it our responsibility as Christians to care for the oppressed? And she guides us in answering these kind of questions with empathy and compassion. She candidly shares her upbringing in the Baptist Church, her divine call to preach, and becoming a civil rights attorney. She was once given an ultimatum by her church to choose between her faith and who she is. She has tirelessly shown Christ's love by fighting for the rights of immigrants, sex trafficked victims, multiple cultures, races, and the LGBT community. She gives us practical advice on how to deal with a family member who has come out with grace and love. Also, she explains why we shouldn't talk with loved ones about politics and religion. Our interview is filled with powerful storytelling, inspirational scripture verses, and valuable resources to change your community for Christ. And Marcia offers a free course for all of the listeners. I really enjoyed my conversation with Marcia. She has a book that she is working on. You can read her blog on political theology matters, and we'll definitely have her back on the show when her book is released. You can see her in action on social media. How she is actively out there on the front lines fighting for rights for those who need God's grace and God's love. So here's some of my conversation with Reverend Dr. Marcia Ledford. Now, your faith intersects your social justice missions in areas of immigration, LGBT, racial equality, and sex trafficking.
Yes.
Now, we talk a lot about sex trafficking here on this podcast, so I would really like to hear about what you think in your experience with sex trafficked victims.
Well, that's an open-ended question, and so I'll start by saying when I was in seminary in Berkeley, California, I became aware of an organization called SAGE, which helps trafficked women get out of their situation and rebuild their lives and move on. And they're quite an extraordinary group. And I learned so much. I was very moved by the stories that I heard and the services that they offer. And my field ministry, when you're a seminarian, you have to work in various churches to get experience at the congregational level. And mine was in Oakland. And a lot of trafficking goes on there, lots of prostitution. It's pretty bad. So I became sort of introduced in some ways to a lot about what goes on with sex trafficking. We have not developed the mission as much yet as we plan to, but we plan to provide resources. I think one of the most important things that we as members of society can do to help eradicate trafficking is to learn the signs. You know, learn what to look for when you're at a restroom on the interstate and you see a woman who's undernourished and scared and maybe doesn't speak any English at all and doesn't know where she is and is quite clearly, you know, something is clearly off. That's when, and then you kind of watch and see what kind of a vehicle she gets in, and, you know, is she in a van? Is she in something that transports a lot of people? Those kinds of things. And you call the police. And, you know, you don't get directly involved, but you just, we're out there all over the place. The traffickers cannot get away from us, the public, you know, because we're everywhere. And if we teach people to be more aware of the signs, we can do a lot to help law enforcement catch these guys and shut them down and get these women freed. And when I say that, I'm talking specifically about women being women and men being sex trafficked and children, but also laborers, you know, people who are being trafficked as basically human slaves. So it's a really important area that we're, you know, getting into. And I think domestic violence is also something we need to be much, much more aware of and look for the signs of battering when we're out and about. I had my collar on one day and a woman came up to me and told me that she was in an abusive relationship and she needed help.
Wow.
And, you know, and so I got her some phone numbers and we got her some assistance immediately. And fortunately, I was in my community and I knew who to call and all of that. And, you know, it's not usually that obvious. It's because I had on a clerical collar. But at the same time, people who are in trouble, in danger, are looking for an out and they're looking for somebody to notice.
Yes. Just to be a human being.
Exactly. I saw a video of a woman who was being abused, and she had to take her pet to the vet, and her abuser was with her, and she was able to slip a note to the vet tech, and she said, "He's got a gun, and I'm scared to death."
Good for her.
And those women, God love them, called the cops and got him in there.
Yay.
And got him out of there and took that gun away from him. So it takes all of us, you know, to participate in eradicating this kind of abuse.
Yeah, just say something. People
Just say, if you see something, say something. Exactly.
Well, most people think of sex trafficking as overseas in Asian countries, but it happens right here in our backyard.
It happens right under our noses. And I live in Michigan at the intersection of I-75 and 80-90. 80-90 goes across the country and 75 goes from Michigan to Florida. That's one of the most, you know, it's one of the greatest hubs for exchanging trafficked persons in the country. It intersects right at the heartland, east and west and north and south.
Yeah, I'm like a couple hours from the Mexican border, and so we get a ton of trafficking victims here. And we had the Super Bowl here once.
Right.
We have the PGA here every year. We've got a ton of golf courses, and people don't realize there's a huge amount of sex trafficking going on with the Super Bowl and the sports events like PGA. I've seen it.
I've heard that the Super Bowl Sunday is the most heavily sex trafficked day of the year.
Dave Ebert is my next guest from episode number 12. Dave Ebert is from Gifts for Glory Ministries, and Dave shares his past struggles with depression, self-worth, and thoughts of suicide. He has captivating stories of how he met the Lord, found his calling into improv comedy, and how he helps victims of sex trafficking to heal using improv classes. This was a fascinating conversation that I had with him. We talked about a lot of things, particularly, I think we talked about Robin Williams and how his suicide had rocked the comedy world as well as the rest of the world. How can you be so successful and look happy on the outside, but then take your own life? We talk a lot about that. We talk about other things, but I love how God uses Dave with something like improv, something fun, is a healing tool for those that have suffered trauma. Listen to what Dave has to say on some of our conversation here. So you can definitely use comedy to heal people in their pain. And you got connected with Salt and Light Coalition. So tell us more about that.
Sure. Salt and Light Coalition is an organization that works with women who have survived sex trafficking. Many of the women that they serve were sold into trafficking by their parents at a young age. So many of them either have a very short, or maybe a non-existent childhood to draw from. So they're very stunted in many areas as far as emotions, especially the ability now to trust people. And so, and most of them obviously have been hurt and used and abused by men. So the fact that me as a guy was asked to come in and serve, the weight of that is not lost on me, but I also see the benefit, because here is a man in a healthy relationship with his wife, who is in a healthy relationship with the Lord, who can come in and bring that as a model for these women to show that it is possible, that not every single man is a creep that's going to hurt you.
Right.
So, and I value that ability to, and that opportunity to bring that example to them. And I teach improv as a way to improve their communication, because many of them, like I said, are stunted either educationally, either they had to drop out of school because they were doing what their handlers or pimp or whatever you want to call them were making them do. And so I go and help them improve communication, find and develop their self-esteem, because when you're learning improv and you're creating stuff together, you're starting to realize, wait, I have a voice, I have something to say, and the things that I say can be valuable. And that only helps to improve the self-esteem. So they start realizing that all the stuff that I've been through in the past is my past, and all the work that I'm doing now to get back on my feet and rebuild my life, I'm worth it because I have something to say. I have something to contribute. So we do that through improv. And at the end of the day, they get an hour where they can laugh like kids, either for the first time or laugh like kids again. Because, I don't say these things to brag on me. God put me in this position. There's been several times where the women or a couple of the women who have come in, and you could see that they are literally carrying their world on their back. The burdens are there. The brow is furrowed. You could see in their eyes that they're waiting for somebody to say that one word so that they can explode on them. And part of what they have to do is they have to participate, even if they're not feeling it. So they still get in the circle. They still participate in the games. And you can see literally that facade crack and fall. You literally see them crack up. And within 5 minutes of participating, the burden is gone. The fierceness in their eyes, the anger or the frustration or the hurt, it fades away. And they get to forget that and realize that there's hope, that there's something bigger than what they're wrestling with in that moment. And that has been such a huge blessing for me to be a part of that for the last couple of years. And like I said, it's such a blessing to be a man in that position, to kind of be an ambassador, literally an ambassador for Christ, to show that it's okay to trust again. And I love doing that.
Episode 35 is Norm Wielsch. Is there a difference between combat PTSD and first responder PTSD? According to Norm Wielsch, your body recognizes them as the same thing. In my conversation with Norm, we hear about his father fighting during World War II and losing almost his entire family during the bombings. True to his grandfather's generation and culture, he never spoke about his war trauma. Fast forward to Norm's service as a police officer when he was diagnosed with a painful disease. We talk about how he went down the slippery slope with painkillers, hiding his condition with fellow police officers, and making poor choices. Find out what happens when he gets sent to prison, the lessons he's learned, and what God was doing in his heart through it all. And Norm offers real and practical solutions for those suffering from PTSD. So he obtained a master's degree in theology and counseling, and then a doctorate in Christian counseling. He went on to become a registered addiction counselor, and he's in the process of becoming a chaplain with the Assemblies of God Church. So his book, Healing a Broken Heart, Christ-Centered Healing of Trauma, is available on his website, christcenteredhealing.com. You can find all of his resources there. Here's my conversation with Norm Wielsch. And he showed us the graves of these young German soldiers, and some of them were 16. You know, they probably had fake IDs, but it is a really beautiful cemetery. And yes, we went to all the other places like Colville-sur-la-Mer, the American Cemetery. But that's what I immediately thought of when I heard about your family's history and how your father fought during World War II on the German side. So just for openers, can you tell us a little bit about your parents' story and your upbringing?
Yeah, that story is my dad's. You know,
Yeah.
his parents died at a very young age. He doesn't even know how they died, if it was cancer or what. You know, medical science wasn't too great back then. And he was orphaned basically at 15. So he had no place to go. And he joined the Army. He lied about his age and joined the Army. And he didn't talk too much about his time in the Army. I believe now it was because of his PTSD. He just didn't want to talk about it. But the things he did say was exactly the same thing. He didn't want to, but if you refused to fight, they would just execute you, you know, if you didn't want to fight. So, but he did he helped the war effort for the Americans by kind of making sure that things didn't work well. He was on artillery, and he always shipped the wrong artillery shells to the wrong guns and stuff because nobody wanted the war. Nobody did.
Wow.
And then he got captured by the Americans. He was, I think it was 6 months in a prisoner of war camp, and the Americans treated him real well. So that wasn't an issue. And my mom, she was also in the military, and she was in the Netherlands. But during the war, Allied bombers basically killed my whole family. I have no one except my mom and dad. Well, my mom had a sister. I'm sorry. My mom had a sister. That was it. They lost their parents. They lost all the sisters and brothers. And so, like you said, they were evil, but war is evil. I mean,
yes,
my whole family died during the war. And I didn't know it at the time, but I think all this stress, this trauma affected the family that we can't even comprehend. Because when they came here, they immigrated here in the 50s, and they had me in the early 60s, and they worked hard, and they did, but they never talked about, they never showed love. They never showed any kind of positive emotions, right? And I think that's part of the symptoms of PTSD.
Mm. Wow, that's an incredible story. Now we generally associate PTSD with military service. You know, American Sniper. Did your dad talk about PTSD in any way?
No, he was the kind of guy who pull yourself up with the bootstraps. You know, don't show emotion. You know, I mean, this is I'm only telling this to make an illustration, not to disrespect him.
Mm-hmm.
But he was the kind of guy, and when I was 16, one of my close friends died in a motorcycle accident, and I was crying, you know, because that was really my first experience with death. And he came into my room and just was yelling at me, "Shut up, stop it, stop crying, men don't cry."
Mm.
And when I couldn't stop, he basically beat me, you know,
Oh.
Men don't cry. And then I learned that at the police academy, it was the same kind of thing. So that was a common thread amongst men of that generation and of, you know, the first responder culture. So it was never shown emotion. Like I said, my mom and dad might have held hands, but I've never seen them kiss or show any kind of real emotion, even my mom. And I believe that's from the trauma of war. But the trauma from war is the same as we can experience here, say, being a victim of a crime, a violent crime, or just being threatened by somebody. I mean, these are the same things. When you see something that's life-threatening, it can really affect you the rest of your life.
Yes, exactly. Now, we're going to talk about first responder PTSD today. Can you define what the difference between first responder PTSD is and how it is different from like a war combat zone PTSD?
Well, I believe there is no difference because you see the same things, right? When you're deployed in a combat zone, you see horrific things. You know, you see killings and shootings and children that have been killed, and you may even have to do some killing yourself. So that's only in a short time distance, right? I mean, there's been guys that have been deployed, you know, 4 or 5 times, but those deployments are generally 6 months. First responders, you know, police and fire, even ambulance drivers, and even trauma room doctors, they see this during a whole career, 25, 30-year career. So it's cumulative, and they see the same things. You know, I've seen many children killed. I've been involved in shootings. Thank God I've never had to shoot myself, but I've seen people die in shootings. I've seen people just shot and wounded, suicides that are just horrific scenes, car crashes that are horrific scenes, trains versus pedestrians. I mean, these crime scenes or these death scenes stick with one forever. I mean, I still see every single one of them. When I close my eyes, I can picture every single one of them in vivid detail.
Wow. And they keep you up at night, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Episode number 5 is Ashley. She was one of my first guests on the podcast. I needed somebody that would be first, besides my husband. And Ashley is someone that went through my Mending the Soul group. And so she agreed to come on the show and tell her story. Ashley is a mother of 3 special needs boys, a survivor of domestic abuse. She begins her story with her traumatic childhood and rebellious teenage years. She talks about how she met her husband and the progression of abuse over the years. She describes how the book, The Love Dare, played a part in her meeting the Lord. After suffering a debilitating childbirth experience, her eyes were opened to the reality of her abusive marriage and planned her escape with her 3 children. In this brutally honest and riveting story, Ashley shares her relationship with God, how she began the healing process, and gives advice to others who are going through abuse right now. I know that you'll be blessed by her story. And thank you, Ashley, for being the first one. So here is Ashley.
And I was also getting so low physically that I knew I had to do something. My body was starting to react to all of the stress and abuse, heart palpitations, just constantly tense, feeling like something's going to happen. And so I think all of those things and seeing the effect on our kids, that's when I decided just to let him know that I'm not okay with it. And I'm trying to remember, even we had a conversation and I let him know I think we need to be separated. And at the time he agreed with me that we need to be separated, but he wanted us to stay in relationship still, even though we were separated. But I knew in my head that I was done. But it was good because that kind of started the process, even though he thought that, you know, in his head, he thought we would work it out eventually. I think it started the process, and we lived in separate places. And then it just has continued from there with filing divorce.
So you're still in the middle of the divorce proceedings now, right?
Yes.
What's your interactions been with him through this proceedings?
It's been just on and off communication. With him, he's not outrightly like glaringly abusive, especially in text messages. That's never been how he is, really. It's more covert. So the communication part, except for about a year ago, we had a situation where he wouldn't leave the house, and that's when I stopped being able to let him be here with the kids. But besides that, the communication has been minimal, thankfully. It's more been through money that the abuse has continued, and also through the legal proceedings. What he's asking for legally feels like abuse also.
Yeah, he was like canceling credit cards and stuff on you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So it's those like subtle, you know, under the radar where people won't notice really that the abuse is still happening.
Yeah. So you look like the bad guy because you're leaving your husband, but he's like, you know, trying to sell the house out from under you and the kids and cutting your credit cards. And it's like, how are you going to feed the children? Where are they going to sleep? I mean, these are your children. It's insane.
Yeah.
Your spouse makes you look like, or it makes you feel like you've lost your mind, or well, like you said in the first time you left, well, maybe he's not that bad. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe it's not him. It's me. No, that's what they do. That's what they do, is they make you question your sanity and the reality of the situation. Now we have Roselly Genao, episode 13. She has a podcast called The Good News Podcast. I was on her podcast, and then I invited her to come on my podcast. That's what we do. We podcasters. So she tells us of her close-knit Catholic family and Dominican roots. As she goes through her college years, she struggled with her faith, depression, lack of self-worth, and drinking. She entered into this abusive relationship and tried to leave twice after her boyfriend tried to kill her. Find out how she found the Lord, got free of her abuser, and is now loving and serving the Lord. This is a bit of a hard story to listen to, but it's necessary, and she is so brave for telling her story and starting her podcast. You can listen to her podcast anywhere you can listen. You can listen to her podcast on any of the available platforms. So please listen to some of Rose's story that we had together.
And, you know, before it was really difficult for me to explain this portion of my story because I couldn't do it without guilt or shame, because that's what the enemy tries to, tries to keep us in shame and secrecy. But I mean, in my relationship with my ex, I became unfaithful. And little did I know then, because I didn't understand then why I was seeking other men and I was, seeking attention from other guys. I mean, it all ties to, for me, it all ties to the fact that I had a really low self-esteem and my self-worth was probably on the ground. Again, I didn't know God. I didn't really have a relationship with him. Like I was saying, I was going to church, but I was just going through the motions because it's what I knew to do. And I was going to a Christian church at this time, but it's just based on the foundation that I had from growing up in that Catholic church. And I just knew to go through the motions. I didn't really understand that I needed to practice a relationship with God. So even though I was going to church while I was in this relationship, I didn't know God enough to know the love that he had for me, and therefore make better decisions. So I saw other men. I saw attention from particularly this one other guy, and I got really involved with him while I was with my ex. And ultimately, that was something that made the abuse worse, because my ex found out about it. I was sleeping and he
Ooh.
just woke me up and dragged me out of the bed because he saw the text messages from the other guy. So alone. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm alone. No one's going to know what happened to me if this man does something to me today. He was violent, but then also he was violent towards himself. He tried to hold me hostage by basically telling me that he was going to kill himself. He took a knife and we were in the kitchen for over an hour, and I was trying to de-escalate the situation. Abused me before, and that I was kind of at that breaking point. He's like, I think you're going to turn me in. His brother, who lived a state over, got there. He de-escalated the situation. He got him out of the house. He moved everything out that day. I ultimately went to the police station. I got a restraining order that day, but that wasn't the end. For me, I couldn't. I don't know. My definition of love was messed up back then, so I thought that I was still in love with him. So it wasn't even like 4 days or 5 days later that I went back to the courthouse and I dropped a restraining order so that I could be with him again, because
Wow.
I thought that, it was a mistake and I was feeling so guilty because of my my unfaithfulness. So I was like, I felt like I hurt him. I disregarded everything that he did to me, and I was just like, well, I hurt him. I have to go back and help him. And
That just blows my mind that you would go back to fix his problems, which I think, and I'm sure you agree with me, this just makes it worse. You going back after all of that because you felt guilty, which was misplaced guilt. Okay, it's great that you acknowledged that you made a mistake, but that doesn't cancel out his abusive behavior.
Absolutely. And I thought it did. That's it. I love the word that you used, canceled. For me, that's what I thought it was like, all right, well, I did this, so he did that. And of course, like I said, going back to what I said earlier, I believed all the things that he told me about me. I believed that that's what I deserved. And so I didn't view it as an issue or a problem.
Now, when did you finally come to your senses and say, I've had enough, I'm at rock bottom, I've got to get out of this relationship, for good?
Yeah. It didn't come by my own, choice. And I say that because a lot of people think that, you always just get to walk out of a abusive relationship, or you just choose to go, and that's not the case. I went back to him, and ultimately we had a lot of issues up until the last time that I saw him. And I was still being unfaithful. I was still seeking attention from other men. And So again, at this point, he's not trusting of me. He's still looking through my phone. He's following me at this point to everywhere that I go. And on the last occasion, we went to a party and we went back to his house after the party, and we were both drunk. And he went through my phone and he saw a text message from the other guy. And basically that's when that's the night that he tried to kill me. He it was the most violent he had been with me, throwing me around the room, really just using me as a punching bag. And up until the point where he tried to strangle me. And I don't really know how I got out of out of his chokehold, but I did. And then ultimately I ran outside after that, and the neighbors were there, and the neighbors, they didn't even want to get involved. They saw both of us. They saw that his shirt was ripped. They saw me, you know, I had blood. I was probably looking all crazy.
Wow.
And I'm like, no, I need you guys to call 911 because he
Really?
tried to kill me. You know, the ambulance showed up, the police showed up, and they detained him. And after this incident, like, you know, the fact that the Lord delivered me from death, because I don't know how I got out of his chokehold. He was much stronger than me. You know, we went through the court, he went to jail, we did all of that. I didn't really have a choice. You know, the relationship had to be over at that point. And it didn't feel like that for me. Even for months after that, it didn't feel like I wanted to leave. And that's the crazy part, you know, that's the part that I was just so deep into his manipulation, into his tricks, that even at that point, I felt like I still owed him. I would say when I found Jesus was when I really knew that I deserved so much more.
We have episode 21 with my good friend, Wanda Burnside. Wanda is one of my best supporters. She was supporting my ministry before anybody else was. I've been on her radio program twice. And so I invited her to come on my show because she is such a talented lady. She is an author and an award-winning poet. We have a special episode that we recorded during Black History Month. She is an accomplished author, writer, and poet. She has a godly heritage, growing up in Detroit, Michigan. In her signature storyteller style, she tells of how she served in the jail ministry with her father when she was 16. She was an active participant in the civil rights movement in the 50s, and how God protected her from being kidnapped during a demonstration. She shares how God called her to write for him and inspires listeners how to use their God-given talents for the Lord. Wanda is giving away free copies of her book, Free From It. She's also the author of Don't Mess With Me, one of my favorites. So I will tell you that Wanda's poems are so inspirational to me that I've picked one of them to put to music. So we are going to partner together. I'm going to sing and create music for her poem. I won't tell you which one it is yet. Don't want to spoil the surprise, but this will be the first place that you will hear the song. I'll be working on that in the next few months here. But the clip that I chose for Wanda is the story of when she was almost killed or kidnapped, and God rescued her from that. So here's Wanda.
It was another time where it was close. I almost was killed because of what I wrote. And so then one day the Lord told me when I was going to be kidnapped because of what I wrote this time. And I was in the room with the people that was going to kidnap me. And the Lord, it was a light hanging off the ceiling on the court was just a light bulb. And I was with all the black leaders in the black movement of that day in the 60s. And they had come here to take me back with them. And the leaders were all the historical figures of black movement in those days in the 60s. So when I was being interviewed by them about what I was supposed to do, and they told me, sister, you're going to have to change your hair to a fro, and you're not going to live here. You won't come back. You're going to be a part of the movement that we are doing, and we want you to live in California, and you're going to live with in one of the prominent female in the black movement, and you're going to be her secretary. And since you can write so outstanding, we want you to run our newspaper. Well, while they were talking to me, and they said, we're going to have to blindfold you so you won't know how we're meeting the other people, and then we're going to the airport. So while they were talking to me, the cord with the light bulb started to swing up from the ceiling, and it started to sway back and forth, And then all of a sudden, the light bulb popped, and all these prominent, outstanding leaders, they thought that was a gunshot because that's the way they live. And when that light bulb popped, the door was open to let me get in the van. And the Lord said, run, run. And I ran out. They couldn't see me because the room was dark. And I ran, and I went out in the alley, and I passed that van, and I ran, and then I turned the corner, and I went down the street. And as I was running, the Spirit of the Lord said, run and do not stop. Run and do not stop. And I kept running and running. And the Lord said, there are cars out here designated for you. So run. Run, run. And I ran and I ran and I cried and I cried. And then I saw a bus just appear out of nowhere. The man opened the door. He said, get in the bus room. And I got in, and he said, sit down. And I sat down, and he said, you're doing what you're not to do. And I just froze. On that bus, it was only like 4 other people. But then when I looked back, it was like angels sent there to protect me. And the bus driver turned back to me and said, don't you ever do that again. And he drove me right on up to where I live. I only had like 6 blocks to go. And when I got off, I looked back at him, and the bus disappeared.
Eddie Caparrucci is our guest from episode number 36. His book is called Going Deeper: How the Inner Child Impacts Your Sexual Addiction. So we're talking about our inner child today. Do you have behaviors that point to sexual addiction? Do you need some real solutions to dealing with it? Does your husband have a porn addiction? Do you blame yourself for his actions? So Eddie Caparrucci is a licensed and Christian therapist certified in the treatment of sexual and pornography addiction. He is the creator of the Inner Child Recovery Process for Sexual Pornography Addictions. It is a unique therapy for treating sexual disorders and has been proven successful with large majority of individuals in his private counseling practice. This unique and interactive treatment approach empowers individuals by helping them understand why they engage in addictive behaviors. We discuss the characteristics of the 9 different child types, the realities of the porn industry, and the truth about women's empowerment. Eddie offers hope for recovery and healing. You can find his book on the abundantlifecounselingga.com or the innerchild-sexaddiction.com, also on sexuallypuremen.com. So here is my conversation with Eddie. Well, probably a lot of women listening right now, and I appreciate that advice for them. Now, on the other side of the pendulum, we have women that are in the porn industry, and you hear a lot from, Pornhub and all these places that, well, porn empowers women. Sex workers are empowered. What would you say to that?
I put it in the myth bucket that
The
you
myth
had
bucket,
with,
yeah.
right? Okay, here. No, it does not. It does not empower anyone. Okay, and I have this. This is what I say, because I get many guys who will come in and say, "I don't see what's wrong with porn. These women want to go and do it, and so why shouldn't I watch it?" And what I say, I go, "All right, tell me the time you met that 12-year-old girl, and you said to her, 'So tell me, what do you want to be when you grow up?' And she said, 'I want to take my clothes off in front of a camera and have sex with strange men and women.' How many people do you think have said to me they've met that person?
Nobody.
Nobody. Now, I will tell you this, Diana. I really believe there are some of those little girls out there who would be like that. And you know why? Because somebody have hurt them very, very badly.
Yes.
And they are already starting to develop a sense that I am not important, I don't matter, there's nothing about me that is good. Now, are there some women who go into porn because they're looking to make some dollars? Yes, they are. But I still have to wonder, okay, there must be some level of brokenness there in order to say, yeah, you know what, I think I'll use my body to let people objectify me, to be objectified in order to make a living. So no, I don't think it, and in fact, actually, I know it doesn't empower. And people who think that, just go and start reading the account of women who've been in the porn industry, who've gotten out, and listen to the story, read the story, see the horror that they went through, see what the abuse they went through, see how they had to sit there and get high before they went to do any of their shoots in order just to get through it.
Sure.
To make it through. So no, it is a complete myth. Porn does not empower women. Porn degrades, humiliates, belittles women. That's what it does.
Yeah, and it's not just vanilla porn, like, back in the 80s when, they had the TV scrambler, in the middle of the night.
I can see you.
You do see squiggly lines and maybe some body parts here and there, but in those days you had to go in secret to find, those certain shops in a certain neighborhood. Now it's everywhere.
Yeah, you just have to click a button.
You just have to click a button. And
see, that's the other thing. That's why I said to you before, I think the whole situation is going to get worse because of that. And also the idea of what is porn teaching our children. And I believe that porn is teaching little boys it's okay to objectify little girls. But worse yet, I think it's teaching little girls it's okay to be objectified. That scares me to death.
It does.
Scares me to death. There's a whole new app out there. I think it's What a Fan, or they're just they're setting up accounts and they're doing their own porn. Now people come in to be members in that group, in that on that channel, and they pay them money for it. And yes, some of them are making lots of money. But the question becomes, in my mind, how long can you be able to do that? How long can you continue to be able to degrade yourself that way?
Right.
And I would also, Diana, I think behind most women who are doing that is a very manipulative man.
You know, I would agree with you on that. There's always somebody, you know, in control of the puppet strings.
Yeah. How many women, young women, have probably been deceived over the years by a guy who says, you know, you are so beautiful. You have a wonderful body. You are so great at sex. You know what? It would not bother me at all that if you went and had sex with other guys, and think about the money that we could make. And I'll guarantee that has happened more than once. Probably happened more than 100,000 times. Those
And
kind
sometimes
of things.
it's forced.
Yes,
They don't have a
exactly.
choice.
You don't
It's
have a
forced.
choice.
Suzanne Burns is our next guest on the show. She is on episode 23. How do you help a girl with a crisis pregnancy? Should you give money to the homeless man on the corner? We find answers to these questions and more with my guest, Suzanne Burns of Foundation House Ministries. Suzanne talks candidly about the inspiration behind starting Foundation House and her own crisis pregnancy. She shares the joys and challenges of running a maternity home, loving those with drug addiction, poverty, and sexual trauma, training the ladies to run a business, and eventually seeing girls come to know the Lord Jesus. We identify what exactly is a poverty mindset and how to get rid of that mentality. We finish our conversation with a challenge to the church and to Christians to become more trauma-informed and reach this community with love, compassion, and understanding instead of condemnation. Suzanne's new book, The Trauma-Informed Church, is tentatively scheduled for a future release. So we will have Suzanne back on the show as soon as her book is released, but sign up for her mailing list to be notified and receive free copies of some of her other valuable resources. The Accidental Social Worker and 5 Ways to Strengthen Your Ministry Without Breaking the Bank. So you can find Suzanne at her website, BeCharityWise.com. So here is Suzanne. Now you have experienced this firsthand. You yourself had a crisis pregnancy of your own.
Yeah. I was a junior in college, and I had grown up in a Christian home and was at a Christian school, and but I was 1,800 miles away from mom and dad.
Ooh.
So, you know, I was experimenting. I was testing my wings, and come to find out, I did not make very good decisions.
Yeah, we all make really bad choices.
Yeah, I found myself in one of those places where I was like the frog in the frying pan. I just kind of woke up one day, and I don't know how I got there. But I was smoking, I was drinking, I was experimenting with illegal drugs. And, you know, and then one day I wake up and I'm pregnant, and it's like, oh, now what?
Yeah, and you're obviously pro-life at that point,
Very much
right?
so,
Yeah.
Very much so, yeah. Yeah, it was never a consideration for me to choose anything but to have my son. It was more a matter of like, how on earth am I going to do this? And I had some good family support. I had some job skills. You know, I had some college, but it was still really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the years, I've just met so many women who, you know, who did not have the things that I had. And I had it fairly easy, and my struggles were still really, really difficult to overcome. So imagine how much worse it would be if she didn't have the things that even I had. And so my heart's always been been soft towards moms and single moms, especially.
Wow. Your ministry is so very important for these girls. I bet they so appreciate it.
No, not as much as you might think.
Well, maybe towards the end.
Usually towards the end, yeah. They're always very grateful when they first come in. They're always in that honeymoon phase, and everything is, yes, Miss Suzanne, and I love you, Miss Suzanne, and I'm so thankful, Miss Suzanne. And then, things shift. Yeah, we start seeing the real girl, but that's a good thing, really. That means that we're actually getting to see her for who she is, and she's getting more comfortable. And so as we start getting into the harder parts and she starts showing her her not so pleasant side, that's when we know we're really getting to dig down deep and do some good healing, restorative work with her. And then if she's willing, if she'll stick with it, and if she'll stay with us long enough, she does reach that point where she's grateful, and almost without fail, they never want to leave. They want to stay forever. And so even though they want to grow up and move out, they're like, they're kind of like high school kids,
Mm-hmm.
they want to grow up and move on, but they really don't want to leave home either.
Last but not least is our guest, Sheila Gregoire, on episode 24. If you have not heard of Sheila Gregoire yet, you will, because she is taking the world by storm here with her new book, The Great Sex Rescue, which is right behind me on the shelf there. And she has gotten some controversial responses to her book. When you're doing something right, sometimes your enemies don't want you to succeed. I've read this book and it is fantastic. It is what we need in this day and age. Do you feel that a satisfying love life in your marriage is out of reach for you? Does your previous abuse and trauma stop you from enjoying a fulfilling sex life? Do the teachings you've been taught all of your life in church about sex and pleasure seem one-sided? We are going to get some fresh hope and healing in that part of our lives. With Sheila Gregoire, there will be something for everyone as we talk honestly and tastefully about important topics such as women's pleasure, the truth about consent, what the Bible really says about not defrauding your husband, porn addiction, purity culture, modesty, practical help for newlyweds, and how to heal after abuse. So this is one of the books that I will give away, just like all of the other guests, if you share the episode and tell us what your takeaway is. This is an uncomfortable topic for a lot of people, but it's a necessary topic. So get over your discomfort and listen to her podcast episode. And we don't use any graphic descriptions. We try and keep it PG, and so don't be afraid. You could probably invite one of your teenagers to listen with you, or maybe one of your kids, or maybe somebody that's getting married soon. So you can find her podcast called Bare Marriage on her website, to love, honor, and vacuum.com. You can also find her book, The Great Sex Rescue. She also has some fabulous courses that would be very, very helpful to you. So check all of those out. And so here is my conversation with Sheila Gregoire. Most people don't believe that somebody can be raped in marriage. Tell us more about consent that you just mentioned.
Yeah, so, one of our big things that we found is that our Christian books do not address consent or marital rape at all, or if they do, they address it in a really bad way. So we surveyed 20,000 women, but we also looked at the 10 best-selling marriage books and the 6 iconic sex books. And then 3 of the best-selling marriage books just didn't talk about sex, so we excluded them from our study. So we had 13 Christian evangelical books on sex and marriage. And then we looked at the best-selling secular book, which is John Gottman's 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. And of those books, only one of them had a robust conversation about consent. And I bet you could guess which one it is. But John Gottman, the secular book, dealt with consent really well. Yeah, the Christian books did not. Now, Boundaries in Marriage does talk about boundaries really well, and how it isn't okay, to insist on something, and it is okay to take sex off the table for certain reasons. So Boundaries in Marriage certainly does talk about that. But what it doesn't talk about explicitly is what consent actually looks like in marriage. But it did do a fairly good job. Like, of all the books, it did the best job. So I don't mean to say that they were all terrible. But in general, we just don't even use the word consent. Mm-mm. And in fact, a lot of books that we looked at actually had incidences of marital rape, and they weren't even called anything bad. Like Willard Harley in His Needs, Her Needs was talking about this one guy, 32-year-old executive, who complains that his wife has no libido. And he says, I feel like I'm always begging her or even raping her, but I can't help it. I need to make love. And there's no commentary that raping your wife is not okay. Like, raping your wife is not okay. And you can't just throw that line out there and then not say anything about it. Like, just leave it hanging. Like, you should be at least saying something like, hey, if you feel like you're raping your wife, you probably are, and you should stop, because sex and rape don't feel like the same thing.
Well, the churches out there teaching from their pulpits that when you get married, your body belongs to your husband, but not so much about the other way around. The husband's body belongs to the wife. It was always, you don't have control over your body. So that is so damaging.
Yeah, and it's really a misuse of 1 Corinthians 7. Because 1 Corinthians 7, 3-5 says that the husband has to fulfill his marital duties to his wife. So actually, the husband's duties are mentioned first, which is interesting. And the wife has to fulfill her marital duties to her husband. And the wife's body does not belong to her, but also to the husband. And the husband's body does not belong to him, but also to the wife. And do not deprive each other, except by mutual consent and for a time that you can devote yourself to prayer and fasting. So that's what that passage says. And it's been used to tell women that you can't say no to sex because your body belongs to your husband. But that's a total misuse of that passage. Because when Paul was writing this in Roman times, husbands had absolute authority over their wives' bodies to the extent that they could murder their wives and not be prosecuted for it. Like, you were allowed to murder your wife. And Paul turns around and says in that context, hey guys, your wife has authority over your body in the same way. Like, you have no more authority over her body than she has over yours. And that's the only time that Paul specifically talks about authority in marriage, and it's totally equal. So, Paul is giving her authority over his body, which was totally revolutionary at that time. And the whole point of 1 Corinthians 7 is that it's mutual. Is that sex is something which is mutual and life-giving. It's not talking about one-sided intercourse. Because if sex is mutual, then that means that her needs need to matter. And sex where her needs don't matter is no longer intimate, so it's not real sex. Like what the Bible's take is that sex is something which is life-giving, which brings you together, which builds your relationship. But sex where one person is using the other with absolutely no consideration of what they're feeling, that's not biblical sex. That's using someone and taking something, and that's not right. And so it's a total misuse of 1 Corinthians 7.
All right. Our next guest was from episode 42, Peyton Garland. Now, the first question I asked her was if her parents were football fans. And she said yes. She gives us a very personal and informative conversation about obsessive compulsive disorder. She suffers from all 4 kinds of OCD. She believes that religious trauma was the catalyst to her diagnosis. So she dispels the myths, the treatments. She dispels the myths, talks about treatments and coping strategies. So her book is called Not So by Myself, which you can get on Amazon. So here is part of our conversation that I had with Peyton. And so you're our OCD expert today. I'm glad
Okay.
to have you talk about this topic because, you know, most people only have a reference of OCD from TV shows, you know, like
Sure.
Monk. I love
Right.
Howie Mandel. I mean, he's famous for not shaking hands and not touching doorknobs,
Right.
you know. Love him to pieces. I mean, I have a joke about being OCD about something or insisting that something be done a certain way, but
Sure.
that isn't the same as the debilitating mental illness, is it?
Right. No, exactly. So, and Monk, he has one of the 4 branches of OCD, which is called contamination OCD. And you can have 1 branch, you can have 2 branches. I personally have all 4 of them. Lucky me. So there's contamination OCD. There's harm OCD, where you're afraid if there's a knife on the kitchen counter, like what if you accidentally stab the dog, or what if you stab the baby behind you, or if you're driving down the road, what if you ran somebody off the road and you don't know it? Do you need to turn your car around to check on them? So that's harm. So that's just one of the 4 branches, along with contamination. Then there is also mental thoughts and taboo rituals. So that's another one. It's also known as religious OCD. So my strongest one is religious OCD. And so what that means is, I guess before I dive in too deep, I'll explain the physical science, because once you talk about the physical science of it, it's not just the symmetry OCD, which is the 4th one, where it's, oh, everything has to be clean. I have to straighten all the picture frames. There has to be an even number of napkins on the table. So the physical science of all 4 of these branches is my adrenaline glands. When fight or flight kicks in, like when you have a thought that you don't like and you can just kind of shake it off and say, oh, that was weird, or that's not me. With people with OCD, your adrenaline glands react to that thought, and your body physically experiences the fight or flight. So the heart rate goes up, the head feels kind of dizzy, and you're in a panic mode. And you can't let go of the idea that that thought may or may not be true. And then what happens with people with OCD is their neuron transmitters fire faster than the average brain. You have a thought you don't want, like, what if I ran somebody off the road? My heart will start racing, my head will start spinning, and you have these neuron transmitters going, hey, that might be real. Hey, we might have a problem. Hey, you probably should be scared. Hey, your brain might be right about that. And it's just this constant mental exhaustion. And it is very debilitating. So I have a friend of mine who lives in Britain. I do have a friend overseas. She spends an average of 6 to 8 hours in the day, not at night, in her bed, because getting out of bed with OCD is that intimidating and that's scary for her. It can physically keep people in the bed. It's what drove me to seek Christian counseling and therapy. And the reason OCD can crop up so quickly is it tends to be genetic. So it's something you're usually born with. But a traumatic experience, typically in children, will trigger it. And my church culture, all the rules, constantly living in fear that I wasn't pleasing God, truly afraid I was going to hell because I didn't say the prayer the right way at the right time. Did it have to be in front of people? Was it supposed to be by myself? Religion triggered my OCD. And so that's why religious OCD is what's so prominent in my life. So you hate to say it this way, but church abuse, spiritual abuse literally triggered a mental disorder. So it took me a few years to work through not having bitterness with the church, for separating my experience from every other church. And that's something that I have to, I talk a lot about giving grace and getting grace, and I have to do the same for church now. I can't label every church as a spiritually abusive campus.
Thank you for being a part of my first year on this podcast, for the listeners as well as my fantastic guests. I hope that you will tell others about it so I can help more people. So we still have the same promotion. I'll be giving a copy of any of the books from any of my guests or any of my musical guests. I'll provide a music download of your choice that you have to share this podcast episode or share the individual podcasts of your favorite guests and tell me what your takeaway was from your favorite guest. Let them know the blessing that they are to you. I work very hard to get you the best guests on this show to help you. And again, I plan on making the podcast better next year. So also, if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Listen Notes so I can hear your feedback on the podcast. All of the guests' links will be in the show notes. The show notes will be pretty long, just like the first episode. Just like part 1, I will have their direct link to their podcast interview and then their website. So I'd love to hear what you think. Next week, we will have a new guest on the podcast, and then I will continue my story, my abuse story, and the lessons that I've learned from it. So be sure to come back next week and the following week. I will also be featuring more music that I'm recording this week. So hopefully you enjoyed the music that I had on the show, and I look forward to featuring the other songs for you. So until then, God bless you, and you have yourselves a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Wounds of the Faithful podcast. If this episode has been helpful to you, please hit the subscribe button and tell a friend. You can connect with us at dswministries.org, where you'll find our blog along with our Facebook, Twitter, and our YouTube channel links. Hope to see you next week.